All right, thinking about the Old Testament and what unfolds with the Jewish people because of the captivity and things that have happened in history with the Jewish people. There's a certain segment in our society that believes that God's promises are yet to be fulfilled. That the Jews never did have their homeland, and it was supposed to be, stable, and they're supposed to possess it and be in the days of glory at all times. But what we want to notice is the Bible states very clearly that God had fulfilled His promises to the Jewish people. In Joshua chapter 21, verses 43 to 45. Let's grab those real quick and just see that when Joshua took them in, it says God did what He said He was going to do. Joshua 21, 43 to 45. Who's got that? Go ahead, Philip.
So the Lord gave to Israel all the land of which He had sworn to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it and dwelt in it. The Lord gave them rest all around according to all that He had sworn to their fathers, and not a man but all their enemies stood against them. The Lord delivered all their enemies into their hand. Not a word failed of any good thing which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel. All came to pass.
Okay. Very explicitly, I'm not sure how you could word it to say any more clearly that what God had promised them had been fulfilled. And so we need to always keep that in mind when we're talking with our friends and neighbors. Keep this passage in mind in particular, that as they talk about the things of modern day and what's going on over in the Middle East, and Jesus is going to return, establish His throne, the Jews are going to be returned to the promised land, and somehow that land is still sacred and dedicated to the Jewish people. It's not so. What He promised them, He fulfilled. And we also have to keep in mind, for instance, back in Deuteronomy chapter 28, where Moses went through this long list of blessings that God would give them and a much longer list of cursings that God would bring upon them, whether they were faithful or unfaithful to His law. And in Deuteronomy 28:64, it says, "Then the Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone." And so He had told them, you're unfaithful, you're going to lose that land that the Lord has promised to give you. So Joshua 21, the Lord had given them that land. And then by the time you get to where we're studying in the Old Testament with the Assyrian captivity, the Babylonian captivity, what Moses had warned them about came about. It was fulfilled. You're going to be scattered. You're going to be distributed out of the land. It's going to be taken away from you because of your lack of love and devotion to the Lord. So He also promised them that when they were in the captivity, if they would humble themselves, they would turn themselves back to God, Deuteronomy chapter 30, that the Lord would bring them back into that land. He would bring them back from the captivity. And we're not going to explore all of that, but those are the essential points to reference when we're thinking about the Jews in the land taken away, and then they're going to end up going back into that land. Well, let's notice here that there were 3 waves of captivity that we talked about before, carried away from Judea, and Jerusalem, of course, being the capital, and the temple eventually being destroyed, the things of the temple carried away into Babylon, the people carried away into Babylon. And this is just another way, of course, to look at it, how that you have the fall of Judah there, at the end of the kingdom of Judah, and then you have the return that begins around 536 BC. So you've got all that unfolding here, and let's notice Daniel chapter 1, please. Daniel chapter 1, as he talks about, or it's made reference to, this first wave of captivity. So Daniel chapter 1, and let's read verses 1 through 7. Who will grab that for us? Go ahead, Clint.
In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hand, with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah of the tribe of Judah, and the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego.
All right, so a lot of this we're familiar with, especially, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're put into this training program as they're over there. What's the difference between this and the Assyrian captivity? Anything you note in distinction here? You don't read in the Assyrian captivity where there were Jews taken and put in positions of power, importance, serving the king. There was a different attitude among them. And these Jews, as you have the record here, there are those who are carried off into captivity into Babylon, but there's not a record of them being spread far and wide. Like the Assyrian Empire, they were spread much further apart. Here, they seem to all be taken into the region of Babylon, not necessarily all to the city, but to that general area. But they're being brought into or incorporated in to this government that is established, and they want to use the best of the best. And that's Daniel and his friends they're of that nobility. So they have a certain amount of education, training, grooming, if you will, up to this point in their life, and now they're being given more by the Babylonian court.
Just as a point of reference, during the Babylonian captivity last time, we hear about the ark as well. You think Daniel, whenever he mentions that articles of gold were taken from the temple, was actually articles in that, or which way do you think?
I believe the second wave is where it specifically mentions, here it mentions some of these things are taken. I believe the second wave specifically it mentions that pretty much all of them were carried away. And at what point exactly the ark may have been taken, I'm not sure. But it's not mentioned again, and to history, it's lost. It's gone. My guess is they saw, well, that's a big hunk of gold. Let's melt that thing down. At some point, somebody did that. I would assume. But so they're chipping away at it here. This first wave of captivity. Daniel and his friends are put into this government, and so it's not as though you can see even here. It's not as though the Jews were looked at by the Babylonians as worthless and lesser than. They're working with them here. But remember, this is the first wave. And then you've got the second wave. And then the third one is where they completely wipe out the temple. Essentially, there's an amount of, okay, we're going to slap you and get you in line, and we're going to get you in line again. And the last one is, we're fed up, we're done. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. And so they finally bring the hammer down. But Daniel, in that first wave of captivity, going over into the land. Now, Ezekiel is in the second wave. We're going to come back to Daniel a little bit later, because he's the guy that lasts a very long time over there in captivity. But let's go to Ezekiel. And notice Ezekiel 1:1. He's carried off into the captivity here. Ezekiel 1 verse 1. Who's got that? Go ahead, Jim.
Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Chabar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God.
Okay. What's Ezekiel doing over there? He's carried off into this second wave of captivity. What's he doing?
In verse 3, it labels him as a priest. So I can only assume that he's doing priestly duties while he's still there with the captives.
Okay, what's one of the responsibilities of priests? I mean, you can't serve at, offering the sacrifices. So what other types of things might he be doing?
Still teaching what God expects out of his people.
Yeah, trying to keep that alive. And we're going to talk more about that in just a little bit. But yeah, there was still a role and a function for the priest among the Jews. And in particular for Ezekiel, as he's there, he's with the captives. He is continuing to teach the captives and relay a message from God to them about the captivity. Because you have to think about it, the Jews being over there, they're rather skeptical that God's going to allow this to continue or that things are as bad as they are over in Jerusalem. And so Ezekiel's there to convey this message. Yeah, you're in captivity, you're going to stay. And in fact, God's going to destroy Jerusalem, which they could not fathom. And so Ezekiel 8 and verse 6. Jump over to Ezekiel 8. And let's notice verse 6 here. Who's got that for us? Mike, you want to get that?
And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing, the great abominations which the house of Israel are committing here, so that I will be far from my sanctuary. But yet you will see still greater abominations.
Okay. So he's referring to those abominations, but what's the result of that? What does God say it's doing to him?
They're getting further and further away from God.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting farther and farther. Give them time to repent so far.
Yeah. He's being driven away from them as he can't have anything to do with this idolatry that they're caught up in. And it was hard for some of the Jews in captivity to understand that, to grasp that. Oh, idolatry is not that bad in the land. Yeah, there may be some in the hinterlands and various high places and all that, but you're talking about that there's idolatry in Jerusalem. There's idolatry in the temple. Mike.
And really, he's just handing them over to what they're doing anyway. They won't serve those other gods, put them in the capital with those other gods, and they'll serve them.
Yeah, exactly right. So jump down to verse 12. Mike, if you go ahead and get that as well.
Then he said to me, Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are committing in the dark, each man in the room of his carved images, where they say, the Lord does not see us, the Lord has forsaken the land.
All right. So what's their concept of the people who are there in Israel still, in Judah?
They think God has forsaken them, even though it's their actions that have caused all of this.
Mm-hmm. And what's their concept of this? Where are they worshiping their idols?
In secret, because they actually have forgotten that God sees and knows all. They don't remember that anymore.
Yeah.
I think they can hide their sins, their practices from God.
Yeah, there's kind of a oxymoron here in that, well, God's forsaken, so he can't see, but yet they're doing it in the dark. They're doing it in these rooms. They're still hiding it because they're somewhere down in there. They know what we're doing is not right. We want to keep this hidden. But Ezekiel is telling the people over in captivity, this is happening. This is going on. Now, you may walk down the street and the guy looks like he's a holy and righteous man. He's, praises Jehovah. Maybe he offers sacrifices at the temple, but he's got his idolatrous shrine set up in secret, and he's worshiping, and there's where your problem is. So all of that's being exposed. You go over to Ezekiel 9 then. Ezekiel 9, there's a sliver of hope, or a bit of a silver lining here. So Ezekiel 9, let's read verses 3 and 4, please. 3, 4, and 5. Who's got it? Go ahead, Carter.
Now the glory of the God of Israel has gone up from the cherub where it had been to the threshold of the temple, and he called to the man clothed with linen, who had the writer's inkhorn at his side. And the Lord said to him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. To the others he said in my hearing, Go after him through the city and kill. Do not let your eyes spare, nor have any pity.
And 6 as well.
Utterly slay old and young men, maidens, and little children and women, but do not come near anyone whom is the mark. And began at my sanctuary. So they began with the elders who were before the temple.
Okay. So you've got this picture, verse 3, God going up from the cherub to the threshold of the temple. It's this idea of God's removing his presence. Remember, he had said that in Jerusalem and there in the temple in particular is where he would dwell with his people. His name would be there. That's where he would come and have fellowship with them. And since that can't happen anymore, God's drawing back away from them. And he tells his servants, Go through the midst of the city and mark the foreheads of those who sigh and cry over the abominations. Who is that? Who's he referring to there? Mike?
I think it's the righteous people who understand that this is not good for us, for them to go in that direction.
Yeah, so go and mark the righteous. And here's the thing about it, God always knows who the righteous are, no matter how bad and terrible things get. There are people who love the Lord and are grieved by what's going on around them. There's a sense in which this was Lot when he was in Sodom. As 2 Peter talks about, it vexed his soul daily. All these abominations around him. Now, Lot, of course, should have done something about that. He should have taken some action. But here's a case where there are people in Jerusalem, as corrupt as it is, there's still a remnant that loves the Lord, that is faithful, that is grieved over what's going on. And God says, mark them. Okay, there's a destruction coming, but there's these righteous that I don't want you to go to destroy. You need to preserve them. And so the Lord knows about that. And he then tells them to go through and to kill, and do not let your eye spare nor have pity. And who does he tell them to slay? Verse 6.
Anyone without the mark.
Okay.
Children, old men.
Yeah. It's pretty much everyone who doesn't have that mark. Destroy them. So God is going to thoroughly wipe out this idolatrous population in Jerusalem and teach them a lesson. You don't want to do this. And it was a lesson that stuck with the Jews. We'll talk more about that later. But Ezekiel 11, and notice verse 23. Ezekiel 11, verse 23. Who's got that for us? Clint?
And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood on the mountain that is on the east side of the city.
Okay. So he goes from the cherub, which you think about the Holy of Holies, to the threshold of the temple. And now he's going to that mountain east of the city. He's withdrawn out of the city. He's not there anymore. He's removed his presence, his protection, any measure of protection that he's had there. So in other words, it's talking about not only this spiritual break between God and his people, but also the idea that now the Babylonians are free to just go in and do whatever and punish the people and carry them off into a final captivity, of course, eventually in that third wave. Any other thoughts there, Mike?
You made a good, strong point about how God feels about sin, specifically with his people. And, you know, we see that throughout the scriptures. And it would seem to me that today, when we give full support into a nation that is so bent on not doing the things of God, we become complicit in their sin as well. So when you started out, you were talking about those who teach that you got to be good to Israel no matter what. You are placing your lot into their sin.
Yes. Something Christians have to keep in mind is we're in the world, but we're not of the world. Our loyalty, our devotion and dedication must be first and foremost to the kingdom, not to any other entity, group, institution, nation, whatever it is. And that's not to say that we are not, patriotic, that we don't love our country. That's perfectly appropriate. That we don't love our state or we don't love our family, community. Sure, we love them. We care about them. We want good. We, stand up and defend either verbally or maybe even put our lives on the line at times for various groups. But we always have to keep in mind the kingdom is first. And that's the only pure and righteous body that exists. All others are just creations of man, really.
I don't know if you ever heard us say while you was in the military. You was I was in, it was always God, family, country. That was their motto.
Yeah, no, the Air Force didn't have those kinds of things. We were like air-conditioned food.
With your remarks, it impresses upon us that as we've studied this, we also see the things that God was intolerant of. And we shouldn't allow ourselves, like you're saying, to get our priorities askew, and we become tolerant of the things that we should become intolerant of. As it says that, we should abhor evil and cleave to that which is good, but, that requires a definition between good and evil. Between the things that people do that are righteous and unrighteous behavior. And again, it's this thinking gets so skewed that we hate people. Well, we don't hate people, but we deplore sin.
Yes.
And therein is a difference.
Right. And we need to have a conscience that is bothered by the sin around us. And that's not to say that being aware of sin around us, we're hysterical, we're beside ourselves. We can't be like that. But we are troubled and grieved by it, not indifferent, like, it's not a big deal, it's just the way things are. We can't just dismiss it. We do need to have a clear understanding of right and wrong and be vexed by what is wrong. Otherwise, we're going to be swept along with it. And if we're not, certainly our children, again, I would cite Lot as a great example of that. But you've got God leaving this land, but he makes these promises. Ezekiel 11, verse 13, while I was prophesying, it says, Lord, will you make a complete end of the remnant of Israel? Down in verse 16, the Lord says that he has not cast them far off, or although I have cast them far off among the Gentiles, although I've scattered them among the countries, yet I shall be a little sanctuary for them in the countries where they have gone. In other words, He's removed them out of that land of Israel, but the ones that he scattered, those are the faithful. Like Daniel and his people. These are the ones that I'm preserving who are devoted to me. They're among those captives, and I'm going to bring them back into this land. And we see that, of course, as hopefully we'll look at with Ezra and Nehemiah and various ones. But so there is this remnant. While he wiped out that land, destroyed that nation, there is this group of people who still know the Lord, love the Lord, and are going to serve the Lord. So, along during these times, Jeremiah is in Jerusalem. Ezekiel's over with the captives, and Jeremiah is back in Jerusalem. So let's jump over to the book of Jeremiah. And let's notice, first of all, Jeremiah 23. Or Jeremiah 22, rather. Jeremiah 22. And let's read verses 28 to 30. Jeremiah 22, 28 to 30. Who will grab that for us? Go ahead, Tom.
Is this man, Coniah, a despised, broken pot, a vessel no one cares for? Why are he and his children hurled and cast into a land they do not know? Land, 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 hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, write this man down as childless, a man who shall not succeed in his days, none of his offerings shall succeed, sitting on the throne of David and ruling again in Judah.
All right, so if you take a peek back at verse 24, Coniah is the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and now this prophecy comes about Coniah. He's going to be childless and all that. What's that prophecy about? What's he dealing with, particularly verse 30? It's a very important point. What's going to happen or not happen, Philip?
He's bringing it into the kingdom, to the kingdom of Judah as it sits right now. Basically, he's not going to have another man sit on the throne reigning over Judah.
Okay, and he mentions specifically there, sitting on the throne of David. So if you back up, of course, David, the Lord had promised him, you always have a man sit upon the throne. As long as that kingdom existed, there was a Davidic line. Even when the kingdom split, remember in the southern kingdom, it was always a descendant of David that sat on that throne, unlike the northern kingdom. So there had always been a king from the line of David sitting on that throne. And here he's saying, that's done. This nation, as a political nation, as an entity, it's over. There will never be another one. So when you think about that, Jesus being a descendant of David, what is impossible to happen?
Zionist theory of Jesus coming down to reign in Jerusalem, become king over all the earth. Premillennialism, on and on and on.
Yeah, that segment of premillennialism that says Jesus is going to sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem, literally the throne of David, literally in Jerusalem, and rule and reign on the earth, it goes against what this teaches right here. So there never was another king in the land of Judah, because God said that's just not going to happen anymore. So, in chapter 23, verses 5 and 6, we're not going to read this. He does say there is a king coming, so one's not going to sit on the throne of David in the sense of ruling anymore in Judah. But 23 verses 5 and 6, he says, the days are coming, I will raise up to David a branch of righteousness. The king shall reign and prosper and execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. His days, Judah will be saved, and so on. So he's saying there is a king, but not the way the kingdom was before. So again, it's hinting at and pointing forward to this spiritual kingdom that would be established by Jesus. Any other thoughts before we jump to 29? Jeremiah 29. All right, Mike, go ahead.
He's also mentioned the lineage of Christ and Matthew.
Yes. Yeah, very good. All right, Jeremiah 29, and let's read verses 4 through 7, please. 4 through 7. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Philip.
Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all who were carried away captive, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and dwell in them, plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, so that they may bear sons and daughters, that you may be increased there, and not diminished. And seek the peace of the city where I have caused you to be carried away captive, and pray to the Lord for it. For in its peace you will have peace.
So what's Jeremiah telling the people?
Basically tell them to put down roots because you're not going in there.
Yeah, you just need to settle in. Mike?
Yeah, normally whenever you see civilizations built on columns, and things like that, because it shows that they're going to be there for a while. They're not moving anywhere, things like that. Now we're even talking about taking wives and sons and daughters.
I know Hank has anyone else gone somewhere and your plan, your intention was, we're just here for a short time and then we're going either back where we came from or we know where we're headed next and all that. Clint?
I moved to Illinois thinking I was going to be there 3 to 5 years, and I was there for 14.
Okay.
So.
But you still long to escape captivity, right? Yeah.
So my plans were not
Okay.
the plans that I was able to carry out.
Okay.
Right.
So
Another thing I just wanted to say is, these verses here, it does show some mercy, I think, from God.
Mm-hmm.
Even in their destitute state of captivity, He says, I want you to flourish.
Yeah. And they did. They actually settled in and they did very well and they did prosper because those who listened to God and they followed these things, they made a life for themselves over in captivity. And in part, you see that echoed in Ezra and Nehemiah because they come back and they have the wealth to be able to rebuild the temple and all of that. And they do get some help from the king in Nehemiah rebuilding the walls, but they have the means, the ability to transport themselves and go back and begin to rebuild their civilization. But when you go somewhere, like if you're in the military and you're sent on an assignment, maybe it's a 12-month assignment, it might be 6 months, it might be 2 years, they're sending you somewhere, particularly overseas, you generally don't buy a house. You just rent or you live on base or whatever because I'm just here temporarily, and you don't settle down, you don't dig those deep roots because I know I'm going on. And that's a different perspective and different way that you behave and conduct your life, thinking, well, I'm settling here. I'm buying a piece of property. I'm going to live here. I'm getting involved in the community and all those different kinds of things. And he's saying, you need to get over there. You're going to be there a while. And so settle in, dig down, put your roots down. And when you do that, God is going to bless you in that. All right. Any other thoughts on that? So how long is captivity going to last? We all know, right? 70 years, right? And you have 3 waves of captivity and you have 3 ways of the return. It's during this time of captivity that the synagogue comes to the fore. This is where at least historians go back. They say, okay, we see this evidence of synagogues being brought up. And what is a synagogue? What was its point, its purpose?
A place that the Jewish community can go and speak about scriptures and things to come, things to do.
Yeah. Clint, you have something? There we go, Tom.
So also a name meant temporary, pick up food.
I'm not sure about that, but it was a place where they gathered together for the reading of the law to keep before them the law of God, the commands of God, the promises of God. It was a teaching institution, if you will, an organization. It was a way for them to stay connected to God during their time of captivity because they could not go to the temple, they couldn't offer the sacrifices and observe the feast days and everything like that, and going to where God had commanded them in the law. And so there's this provision, or there's this expediency, I suppose you would say, that they came up with. You get into the New Testament, you see often where it talks about Jesus or Paul going to the synagogues. When he would travel, he would go in there because that's a Jewish community. Those are people who are spiritually minded from among the Jews. They're familiar with the law because when they went there, it was the reading of the law. And particularly in Luke chapter 4, you remember how that when they're in there, Jesus was reading from the Scripture and he taught out of the book of Isaiah. And the people marveled at his teaching. So that's the type of activity that's taking place in those synagogues. And it's a place of meeting. And that goes back to James chapter 2 when it talks about somebody comes into your assembly. That word there is synagogue. And it's just simply saying there is a physical location where you gather together to worship and study from the Scripture. Mike.
I think that those captives that God took, you see at the core what was really most important to them, and that is that we can keep people with the gospel.
Exactly. So they were not, they didn't, while they may have adopted some of the things of the culture around them, maybe the dress, the way they built their homes, maybe the local agriculture, whatever they could make work in those things. So there were things that they adapted to there, but they did not leave that base and foundation of worshiping the one true God and following His law. And that's similar to us in our captivity here, if you will. There are things we, depending on where we live, the time in which we live, the way we dress, the type of homes we live in, the types of jobs we have kind of fit the culture around us. But we cannot adapt or change our religious convictions and beliefs to fit the culture. They didn't do that, and that's why God brought them out of captivity. That's actually a lesson we could teach all together. So, Mike, I'll let you come up with that. The rise of Cyrus. Rise of Cyrus. So let's go back to Isaiah chapter 44. Isaiah chapter 44, because remember, Isaiah was during the days of Hezekiah, before the Babylonian captivity came along. And so you're talking about a prophecy over 100 years, if memory serves me, before he came to being. But Isaiah 44, and let's read 24 through 28 here. Who will get this? Go ahead, Caesar.
Thus say the Lord, you, your Redeemer, and He who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord who makes all things, who stretches out the heavens all along, who spreads abroad the earth by myself, who frustrates the sights of babblers and drives diviners mad, who turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolishness, who confirms the word of His servants and performs the counsel of His messengers, who says to Jerusalem, you shall be inhabited, to the cities of Judah, you shall be built, and I will raise up a waste place. Who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers. Who says to Cyrus, He is my shepherd, and He shall perform all my pleasure. Saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple, the foundation shall be laid.
Okay. He goes on to continue to talk about Cyrus there in chapter 45. But is there anything you find curious about that or interesting? Go ahead, Cruz.
He referenced Cyrus by name, but it was about 200 years before he was actually born.
So you think about that, referencing him by name. Cyrus was what? As far as nationality, ethnicity? Persian. What's Persian today? Iran. Yeah. So in our day and age, it's a little hard for us to comprehend that. But there was a time when those people were super smart, super powerful, dominant on the world stage. But Cyrus was really the beginning of that. And so it's prophesied here, he's going to be used by God to help bring his people back, reestablish Judah and the Jews in the land of Canaan. And his nickname, of course, is Cyrus the Great. Anybody ever studied about Cyrus the Great? Like read some books about him? Okay, if you read some books about him, you understand why the Great is attached to his name. Because the man was incredibly smart, very powerful, he was an excellent leader, ruler, though, brutal at times, but he knew what he was about. And he rose to power in Persia. He won a military victory over his grandfather, the ruler of Media, in 550 BC. And he began to move west into Asia Minor, and then also, of course, to take on Babylon. So in modern day, Babylon is in the nation of Iraq. It's along the Euphrates River. This is kind of the ruins of Babylon here, at least part of them that are there. You can go over today and walk around. That's one of the amazing things, again, about this recorded history. You can go and walk around where these people were walking around. Where Cyrus walked the streets of Babylon, or Darius, or whoever else, Daniel and his friends, you can go and walk there. So it helps us to comprehend that what's written in the Bible is not just a made-up story. It's not a fantasy. It's not a fairy tale. These people lived. There's overwhelming evidence of them living. There's overwhelming evidence of the accounts that are given within the Word of God that we're going to talk more about in just a little bit. But there is, without question, substantial, undeniable proof that what we read about in the Word of God is accurate, true, and reliable. So, think about Babylon. Who knows how the Persians took the city of Babylon? Because what was Babylon like, Hank? What was the city like?
It was a walled city, heavily fortified. There was only one way in.
Yeah, and the wall was so big, I think it was 2 chariots pulled by horses could be side by side and go around the top of that wall. I mean, you think about how huge. So the walls are not generally like the walls. We build walls basically straight up. Their walls spread out at the bottom. So if you can get 2 chariots of horses up on the top of that wall, the base of that wall is massive. And so it was considered to be impregnable, that they didn't worry really about the enemy getting in to the city. So Daniel chapter 5, let's notice here in Daniel 5 verses 25 to 31. Daniel 5, this is, remember the night where this is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, his son, who had taken on the throne, was off evidently on some type of archaeological exploration. He was not really concerned about the kingdom and doing things. He was more concerned pursuing his own passions. He's gone. He's away. And so Belshazzar is here, and he is having a drunken feast when the Persians they know they're outside the city of Babylon, but he's so unconcerned because he trusted in those walls so much that he's having this feast, and he's getting drunk. All of his people are getting drunk. They bring the vessels from the house of the Lord, and they're drinking out of those. And this is where you have the handwriting on the wall. And so let's jump down and just read that interpretation, verses 26 to 29. Who's got that? Go ahead, Ron.
This is the interpretation of each word, meaning God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the commandment, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So what is he being told? What is Belshazzar being told? Like,
You're being replaced.
yeah, you're done.
Yeah, the kingdom is going to be removed,
Yeah.
and you will as well.
Was that a miss? All right. So I thought, man, that 5 minutes went fast. But yeah, he's being told, you're finished. You've been found wanting. The Lord is done with you. Verse 30, that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Now, when it says Darius the Mede received the kingdom, what it's talking about is you have Cyrus, who is the king over the entire empire, and Darius would be the king over Babylon, the province of Babylon. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But how is it that they got into the city? Who knows that account? Philip?
They redirected the river and just kind of walked under the wall.
Yeah, so the river ran through a portion of it there. It ran under the wall. And so the Babylonians thought, oh, well, you got this river, and it's not like a tiny river either. It's a massive river running through there. They thought, well, you got the walls, the river. How in the world are they going to get in here? Well, it was no impediment really to the Persians, because the Babylonians, the accounts tell us, they're watching them do this work out there, but they think, well, it's no big deal. Well, in the night, that river drops to the point where they can get in there and come under the wall without drowning. They get the army in there, the city's gone. It's fallen. So they fall. The Persians take over, Mede and Persian Empire. And let's notice then Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Daniel 6, 1 and 2. Who's got that? Go ahead, Philip.
It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss.
Okay, so it's very interesting. Daniel chapter 1, Daniel's carried as one of those young captives, and he serves under Nebuchadnezzar. You have Nebuchadnezzar's son come to the throne. You have his grandson sitting there as kind of regent in the kingdom, and then all that's taken away. There's a new empire that's swept through and taken power, and boom, Daniel's there. He's one of them. Go back now, please, to Ezra, the book of Ezra, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. We're going to end on this. Ezra, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Who's got this for us? Go ahead, Clint.
In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord and the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let each survivor, in whatever place he sojourns, be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, goods, and with beasts, besides freewill offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem.
All right. So Cyrus is that king that declares that they are allowed to return. Now, it wasn't necessarily a unique thing that the Jews were a people allowed to return, but it is in connection with the prophecies that were made. Stunning that this Cyrus, this ruler that comes to power, his name is Cyrus, and he was named by people who didn't believe in Jehovah God, and here he is, and he does exactly what the prophets had foretold of him doing, and giving permission and endorsing, supporting them going back, and calling on the people, whoever wants to go back, and then the rest of them to support the return of the Jews and rebuilding of the temple there in Jerusalem. All right, we're going to have to end up there. Lord willing,